Hi, I'm making a game about a sad Mars rover, and this week I was left with an interesting question. Is my game fun? Because, that's what games are supposed to be, right? Fun. That's why we do them. While it's true my game's more of a, emotional journey, it still needs to be fun, right? And while I've been making these videos, the last few, there have been a few sections like this. Harry, are we there yet? And when you turn the satellite to, oh fucking hell, it's over there! I spy, with my little eye, something beginning with, ooh, horrible seam in the map. Come on, Perry, you can do it. Look at that, she's getting it. She's getting there. And when we finally pull the satellite to it, take two, oh, fuck it up. Where I'm quite obviously not really having fun. So let's fix that, because I've tried fixing myself, and that's a dead end. So, right, first step in making my game feel like a game is controlling it. Controlling it. I'm using a controller. That's it. Yeah. So that's why you can't hear my horrible keyboard noises. You can now hear horrible controller noises instead. So I've got left, right, up, down to move around, and then the left bumper and the right bumper are to rotate Perry like that. A is to boost, I think X is to sample, if I remember rightly, and then here's my favourite one, up with the right joystick, looks up. I wanted to use as many buttons as I can, because I wanted it to feel like you were actually piloting a rover, or, a submarine that's about to implode. Poor taste, Joey, poor taste. But yeah, you can now fly around. I'm not 100% happy with the controller, because, I feel like the leaning should be directional, and at the moment it's just left and right, and it's kind of hard to, I feel like I'm pushing the stick forward here, but I'm definitely leaning to the right a bit as well. So it needs some work, but for now it does at least work. Now, actually adding all of the controller support was quite easy, because Unity has this action map where you can just say, if I'm using the keyboard, use these buttons, and if I'm using the controller, use these buttons. And that makes sense, right? That's intuitive. That works. What doesn't work is the fact that if I want to say, is the player currently using a keyboard or a controller, I can't just find out easily. No. Why would anything be easy with Unity? I had to find this random player input thing here and put the input actions in it. Even though everything was working fine, you could control it fine. This is irrelevant to its actual, functionality. But if I want to say, oh, which scheme am I using right now? This is necessary for some reason. I don't know why, but it is. So it's there now. So I added that, and then the tutorial prompt, I wanted it to change whether you were playing on controller or on keyboard. So obviously, if you're playing on keyboard, you don't want to say, oh, use the left joystick, because you don't have a left joystick on keyboard. And that seemed like a fairly easy, simple thing to do. But it took me about a week to figure out why it wasn't working. It was so ridiculous and poorly documented, it was a nightmare. So even after I've added this player input thing on the right, I needed to, in here, in this one random drop down, have a controller and keyboard added as a control scheme. Even though in here, these were already, they were there. It says keyboard after it says gamepad after it. So it knows if I'm using a keyboard or a controller. It knows that. But I have to, but it works now. I fixed it. It works. So that's the important thing, and nobody's angry about it. And the next thing I wanted to change to make the game a bit more fun was to change the controls a little bit. Well, not the controls, but the all of the behind-the-scenes numbers that control Perry, because before everything was a bit floaty and it didn't feel like you could control. I need to move that sample area. That really winds me up. Yeah, you need to control Perry, but it felt a bit weird because she was a bit too light and a bit floaty, and I know she's floating anyway, but but also she'd crash into the ground too hard if you were just driving forwards, and so there were a few things that needed to address. So first off was I made her weighty. She is now a thick robot. I think I more than doubled the mass in the rigid body. So yeah, she's heavy now. Because of that, the hover was a lot lower to the ground. So if I show you here in this script, under player controller, we have these two variables here, the multiplier and the max hover force. Now, the hover force is sort of how far from the ground you will be hovering, essentially. So if I put it down to 1, I mean, it's not quite enough to lift me, but if I put it to like 3... Oh no, sorry, I got this wrong around. So hover force is how quickly you bounce from the ground. So if you imagine this like suspension, this is like the strength of the springs. And then the multiplier is like the length of the springs. So if I turn this down to like 2 or 1, then I'm still hovering just about, but I'm hovering really close to the ground. But if I turn this up to 50, then she needs to leave. Her planet needs her. This also brings me on to the next thing. So you see the boost is not recharging while she's in the air, because before it was, and that's a bit of a bug. Oh, this is how high up we're hovering apparently. That's pretty ridiculous. So I've changed the multiplier to be about 5, and the max hover force to be about 10. So she pushes off the ground, but not violently, and also she hovers at a respectable distance. And then I've also increased the boost force, so you can go a bit higher with the boost, but because you can't... There used to be a glitch where you could sort of fly if you angled yourself at the right direction and then just held forward, and that's why I reduced the boost, because in the base game it is technically sort of possible to fly if you really angle it properly, but that's really tricky to do, because I halved your speed if you're not on the ground, which, you know, it felt weird, because if, say I'm going to do a sick jump here, I'm going to do a sick jump. Ooh, lagging. Let's try that sick jump again. So say I'm going to do a sick jump like this. That feels much better than it did before, because before you would leave the ground and then just sort of stop a bit. So yeah, now she just feels generally more fun to drive around. But because she feels more fun to drive around, she needs some better terrain to drive around in. So when you first come through this cave, you've got a much cooler opening view of the world. Ta-da! And you've got some far off mountains and some not so far off mountains and lots of big rocks. And just generally, I think, a better vibe. A better, you know, this feels more like a planet and less like, you know, a big old patch of terrain, which is what I was going for. It's still not quite done. I need to get a different texture for the old mountains over there, because it does just look a bit weird. But yeah, much more happy with this. And I've got a boulder field, which was part of the original plan, so driving through here is going to be a bit more of a challenge when you're coming through with a fertilizer or something, because there's lots of little rocks like this that are just going to boop, get in your way. But yeah, let me show you around the new crib. So firstly, we have this opening area here where the base is going to be. This is going to be your start and end point for missions. And first off, you've got this big old archway here, which I wanted to make like... There's a lot of games where, like Elden Ring is a good example. When you first come out of the tutorial, you're met with a grand view of the world, and I wanted to sort of replicate that for the first level. When you go through here, I want it to be like da 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 da. Excuse me. Da 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 da. Here's the world, right? So I needed some sort of archway, and then I've also planned to have a collectible up here. Spoilers if you're going to play the game. I don't think it's that much of a spoiler, but collectible up here. So I've made it so you can drive up these rocks here and get to the top to get a collectible. I am worried that you'll be able to fly over onto this terrain, but yeah, you know, you do you. Then as we come through the archway to the left, let me turn the lighting back on actually. Looks much nicer like that. So, to the left we have the first... Ooh, my computer can calm down. To the left we have the first sample area. This is going to be the first area you go to in like the second or third level or something like that. And you're going to get some dirt samples and plants and all of that kind of jazz. So that's where that's going to be. And then as a bit more of a challenge, you're then going to have to go to this boulder field over here and navigate around, plant some plants, get some samples, all that kind of stuff. And then there are also a couple of optional areas. So over here I've made another little cave, which is very dark and spooky. Ooh, I can't actually see where I'm going. Here we go. And then through here, there's going to be a little collectible over here. But there's going to be no missions that point you here or anything. It's just going to be if you explore, if you find it. And then similarly, over here, there's some sort of anomaly over here. All of these rocks are sort of hovering. And if you can jump on all the rocks and fly around here and boop, 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 up to the top, here's going to be your last collectible. And then I've put just a couple of rocks just in the general middle of the map, because I'm assuming the satellite's probably going to go about here-ish if you've played the first game, you know why the satellite goes sort of midpoint. That's just where it went last time. That's where it's going to go again. And then over here is going to be the place where you go on your final mission to put the big old Genesis what's-his-face. And I didn't want too much terrain difference over here, no rocks or anything like that, because this is supposed to be a lake, not like a literal lake, but like the Lake of Tranquility on the moon. So you're going to fly over here and put the thing on this little island. And I didn't want to detract from that spectacle, and I didn't want to have anything in the way when you eventually have to put it there. So yeah, that's what that area is. So here's what the map looks like as a whole. This time there are no horrible terrain seams or anything like that, because before I think it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 terrain panels or something like that. And then when they met, they all had a bit of a weird, like, didn't quite join, the texture was a bit weird. But this one is just one big bit of terrain. It's all one map. And it's technically, square foot wise, a bit smaller than the old map, but it's much more economically spaced. There's not as much just, well, this. So yeah, it's just, I think, better overall for gamers to explore around, and it feels more like a planet as well, which is the main thing. So the process of making this was, I first started off with these faraway mountains. I wanted it to kind of force perspective a bit, so you can't just see infinitely away and think, oh, well, this is just a bit of a map. No, these are supposed to be like faraway mountains. I'm not sure they quite do that yet, but once I change the terrain texture for these mountainy bits, that should hopefully have that effect. And then I started sectioning off parts within the map so that you've got different nooks and crannies to explore. And then finally, it was putting in rocks. Lots and lots and lots of rocks. Now, there are lots of rocks in the world, but there are actually only 4 models of rock, just spun and rotated and scaled in different ways so that they look like different rocks. And well, I'm sure you can tell in a couple of places, like, oh, that's very obviously the same rock as over there. Most of it, I think I've done a pretty good job of, you know, hiding that many sins. And this way, I didn't have to find more rocks on the asset store. This is just one pack of 4 rocks, and I think I've managed to use them to their fullest. At least I hope. So yeah, a bit light on the old updates this week. Again, been a bit of a busy life month, and also, you know, a couple of behind-the-scenesy bits for next time. So yeah, that's the updates for this month, and I'll catch you on the flip side, flip-floppers. God, I wish I could fix myself.